Hi, welcome to BeMORE. I'm Nicolette Wolfe, the CEO of BeMORE. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are delighted to introduce to you Lord Michael Hastings of Scarisbrick, CBE. Welcome, Michael, to tonight.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
Let me tell you a little bit about BeMORE before we start. BeMORE is a charity that is passionate about embedding generosity into culture. And we do that through connecting, educating, and inspiring people passionate to make a difference in this world through living generously. Now, in this global time of crisis, seeking good wisdom is imperative. And BeMORE wants all our community to seek good wisdom, to learn how to give well, to create smart impact. So as a response, we have launched inspiration and teaching in order to teach you how to be more generous. We've been inviting BeMORE ambassadors and key generous world changers to come. And in the next few months, you're going to be learning and hearing from key philanthropists who have really lived generous lifestyles, and they're able now to give back their wisdom and insights to us so that we can learn to give well and create a lasting difference. So tonight we have Lord Michael with us. And Michael, I've been trying to pick out key headlines from your biography to share with our community. And actually what I realized was that you have so many that they're all quite important. And so if you forgive me, and it might take a minute or two, I'm just going to try and read a few because I actually think it's quite important for us all to recognize the plethora of skill that you have witnessed, experienced, and we can really learn from all of that. So I'm going to just bear with me as I read this list. So Michael began his career as a teacher before moving into the government and the government services. And then he moved from that into the BBC, and he was a presenter in 1994 on a programme called Around Westminster. And then he joined their corporate affairs division. He then became the BBC's head of public affairs and its first ever head of corporate social responsibility. In 2006, he then moved to KPMG International and became the global head of citizenship. And then he represented KPMG International on the Global Corporate Citizen Committee of the World Economic Forum. He has been a member of their Global Council on Diversity and Talent, served on their Next Generation Council, and in 2011 he became a member of their council on the role of business. And Michael, he has actually led the WEF Global Agenda Council, the Future of Civil Society, and in 2016 joined their council on migration. Michael is a trustee of the Vodafone Group Foundation and vice president of UNICEF UK and Tear Fund. He's been a non-exec director of British Telecom, a global board member of Millennium Promise, and a board director of Global Reporting Initiative. And that is not all. Michael is president of ZANE. This is a development agency focused on Zimbabwe. He's patron of Free the Children and a director of Junior Achievement Worldwide. In 2003, Michael was awarded a CBE for services to crime reduction, which includes 15 years as chair of Crime Concern and 9 years serving on the Commission for Racial Equality. In 2005, Michael was awarded an independent peerage at the House of Lords. And in the same year, he received the UNICEF Award from the then UK Chancellor for his outstanding contribution to understanding and effecting solutions for Africa's children. In 2014, he was conferred with a doctorate in civil law at the University of Kent, and in 2017, he was installed as a Chancellor of the Regent's University London. Now, that is quite a lot to achieve in your career, Michael, but I know
I'm only 22.
Oh,
only 22.
Well, but I know from experience that this is only half of what you do. behind the scenes of this great, impressive list of achievements, I know that you mentor people, you are a supporter of initiatives, you're friends with many, many, and you really empower people to become more of who they are through your kind and selfless generosity. And I know for me and for BeMORE, you have really been a key ambassador and a key supporter. So I really want to thank you for that before we get started. But for me, what's really important is trying to just gather all your wisdom and insights. And this is such an opportunity for us to hear all your wisdom on philanthropy. And I really am excited that you're going to impart some of that wisdom to us tonight. People who are listening, you can join us in the chat. Please do send in your questions as Michael speaks, and we will pick a few to ask him at the end of his talk. And we hope to round everything up by 9 o'clock. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Lord Michael of Hastings. Over to you, Michael.
Nicola, thank you. And thank you to all of those of you who are bearing yet another Zoom. I think we're all getting a measure of Zoom exhaustion. And however, it is a mechanism through which we can talk to each other. And I wish this could be more in person. I much prefer that, but we are exactly where we are. So I want to give you a set of perspectives on and around philanthropy that come as a result of thinking and conversation that is taking place because of coronavirus. These are major moments in any country's history when we get the opportunity to think about how we are, how we respond, and what it means for the future we say we want. Now, I'm going to show you some pieces of paper, and I'm going to show you some short videos. But here's the first piece of paper. This is the New Statesman. You can see global leaders from President Trump all the way through to Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel. There they are, the final reckoning. And this is the New Statesman saying that we've had a liberal consensus in our world since the Second World War. We just recognized and celebrated 75 years since the Victory in Europe Day last week, Friday. We've had a period of time where we've all been able to enjoy the fruits of great material benefit. We've enjoyed ourselves, we've traveled around the world, we've gone to endless parties, we've had relish and fun, and then we've spent 7 years, well, 7 weeks, it feels like 7 years, locked down. And now thinkers are beginning to say, what does this teach us? How are we meant to think about the consequences of the weeks that have gone by, which feel like the years that have gone by? What does it say about the years we want in the future? Now, I'm a serial reader of major magazines and newspapers, and I like to keep up to date. And my two favorite magazines every week are The Economist and Time magazine, because they literally tell the times. And The Economist helps me to think economically as well as politically. I was reading through this week's Economist earlier today, and there is a very important article written by a Canadian historian, a woman who is reflecting, Margaret Macmillan, on what do these events tell us in the context of history. So let me just read a paragraph of what she wrote. It's called "The Pandemic is a Turning Point in History. France in 1789, Russia in 1917, the Europe of the 1930s, the pandemic of 2020. They are all junctures where the river of history changes direction. The COVID-19 crisis may be a pivotal rather than a revolutionary moment, but it too is challenging the old order. Like France's cashiers, the coronavirus forces questions about what sort of future we want, what the proper role of government is, and what makes a healthy society. We face a choice to build better ways of dealing domestically and internationally with this challenge and prepare for inevitable future ones, or let our world become meaner and more selfish, divided, and suspicious. You see, we are actually having to reflect on our behavior. Now, I know a lot of you listening are young women and men, and you may think viruses are something that just happened in 2020. So I want to give you a tiny bit of perspective before we go on. There have been viruses all through known history. Let me take you, for example, to the plague of Justinian that happened in 542 AD. 50 million people were killed, and some say it led to the fall of the Roman Empire. We've had the Spanish flu. That was in 1918 to 1990. 40 to 50 million people killed across Europe. Smallpox. Most of you will have been inoculated against smallpox as a baby, and so you haven't had to suffer smallpox, but 56 million people died in the 16th century from smallpox. And way back in the 14th century, there was the Black Death, the bubonic plague. 200 million people died. 30% of Europe's population wiped out. So please remember that what you might fear as today's drama has been a state of history. But we're meant to learn things from history. Things about our society, things about our politics, things about our services, and things about ourselves. I want to play you the first little video I want to show you, The Great Reckoning. What should we learn about this period of time?
Tell me the one about the virus again, then I'll go to bed.
But my boy, you're growing weary, sleepy thoughts about your head.
Please, that one's my favourite. I promise just once more.
Okay, snuggle down, my boy, though I know you know full well. The story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, of poverty and plenty, back before we understood why hindsight's 2020. You see, the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got much bigger than we ever could have planned. We'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick. You could have anything you dreamed of in a day, and with a click. We noticed families had stopped talking. That's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted, and the work-life balance broke. And the children's eyes grew squarer, and every toddler had a phone. They filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise, they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker, till you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below, we filled our cars. We'd drive around all day in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic, because our waste was never capped, until each day when you went fishing you'd pull them out, already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why. It's best to not upset the lobbies. More convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden, amidst the fear and all the while, the people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you and calling up their mums. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe, and the beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we'd left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new, and every simple act of kindness was now given its due.
But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow, and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many. But that's the story of how it started, and why hindsight's 2020.
Fantastic stuff. Deep stuff. The kind of thing that makes us think, if we emerge from all of this the same, what has really changed other than great loss and many deaths and the traumatic freezing of normal life? We can't. So as I've been reading things, I've been gathering insights, and one of the best articles I read was in the Daily Telegraph just 2 weeks ago. It was headed "The 10 Most Important Ways Life Will Be Transformed by Coronavirus." And the author, a well-known journalist, writes as follows. This is from Alistair Heath. He says the new normal after COVID will be grimmer, more cautious, less optimistic, a poorer world. It will be at once more collectivist, with the state on a quasi-permanent wartime alert, a paternalistic public health and a mask-wearing culture, and more data sharing, but also more individualistic, as people and families strive to increase their spheres of autonomy to protect themselves from the outside world. Maybe we'll save more. Maybe we'll be more divided. That, he says, at least are some of my predictions. What is certain is the last few years, BC, before coronavirus, were a golden age. And yes, foolishly, we never realized how good we had it. Herman Van Rompuy was the most senior politician in the European Union until a decade ago. He was president of the European Council. And on the 16th of April, he wrote a seminal piece about the implications of coronavirus on European culture. He says this crisis is about life and death. Had we done nothing, the cost of human life would have been enormous, many times higher than any other winter flu. But what it reveals to all of us is that we have become interdependent and so vulnerable. He goes on to say the primacy of politics had to give way to experts and scientists. Until recently, they were presented as unworldly and irrelevant. How hollow the slogans, "Take back control," "Make my country great again." The crisis also spiraled out of control in countries ruled by populists. The new heroes are not the popular elite, but doctors, care workers, ordinary men and women who at great personal risk save lives, keep society running. We've changed some of our emphasis because we need to change our mindset. The prospect that we might become grimmer, poorer, meaner as a consequence of this highly emotional experience would be a devastating outcome. Now, as I said before, pandemics are not new. We've had them all over history, and there was a big Chinese one, yes, a Chinese one, in 1911. It broke out in a northern city in China, and 60,000 people died in northeast China. It didn't get that far around the world because in 1911 there wasn't mass flight transport. But because of the fact that the Japanese controlled a port city and there was a border with Russia, it did spread a bit. And Yes, people traveled by boats, and it did get to unacceptable places, the United States, parts of Europe. So what happened back in 1911 that is so different to now? Well, in 1912, the leaders, the virologists, bacteriologists, the key scientists, the political leaders from the United States, Japan, Russia, the UK, and France all decided to come together in China in order to create what eventually became the World Health Organization. In other words, from the tragedy of a previous viral outbreak came a collaboration because of humility. Who wants to just get it and fight it? But rather, how can we prevent it? And from that came, of course, the inoculations for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, smallpox. Actually, all of those now pretty much eradicated. Good things can come from painful experiences. One of the people I was reading his reflections last week was Bill Gates, and there can't be in many ways a more generous man than Bill Gates, or certainly than Bill and Melinda Gates, the two of them running one of the biggest, most impactful foundations in the world. And he writes a very important piece also in The Economist just on the 25th of April, in which he says that we're going to progress not just because of science, it's also going to be, he says, our ability to make everyone benefit from that science. There's a great learning from the Second World War and its end in 1945 was that the benefits of globalization could spread across the world, not to every part of it. I regret the unfairness of an unequal world where there are still far too many, that billion, who are still struggling with the basics and very poor. But wealth has spread around our world. And we're going to need to see that medical provision, health provision spreads around our world. But he goes on to say these two very important paragraphs. I hope, he says, that wealthy nations include poorer ones in their preparations, especially by devoting more foreign aid to building up their primary healthcare systems. Even the most interested person or the most isolated government should agree with this by now. This is not a time for self-centeredness. This pandemic has shown us that viruses don't obey border laws, and that we're all connected biologically by a network of microscopic germs. If a novel virus appears in a poor country, we want its doctors to have the ability to spot it, and we want to contain it as soon as possible. None of this, he says, is inevitable. History doesn't follow a set course. People choose which direction to take and may make the wrong turn. The years after 2021 may resemble the years after 1945, but the best analogy for today may be November the 10th, 1942. Britain had just won its first land victory of the war, and Winston Churchill declared in a speech, "This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." Things will change, and change strongly. And two responses to me are most important at this moment. One response is to be unfearful, to contain the facts as much as we want to contain the virus. If we contain the facts, then, and we recognize the levels at which infections have been, and the reality and proportions at which deaths have been, and who is very little affected and who is more significantly affected, we won't live in fear, we'll live in freedom. It's only when people have more freedom do they give more. Because from the well-being of their inner heart comes the well of generosity. So we need to stay conscious of the facts, and we need to stay prevalent of our need to retain our engagement with others. I was reading an article by Gordon Brown, the former British Prime Minister. He was challenged in the new Statesman magazine, which is sort of left of centre, but it's a very good read. He was telling it about whether the solution to all of this is still actually global, with many countries and many individuals protecting themselves, countries becoming more isolated, shutting out others, neighbors, yes, coming out to clap, but walking on the other side of the road, people afraid to hold, to hug, to be present. And charities having an absolute collapse of public generosity. Thank God for the government in this country, which has stepped up with a significant amount of resource. But even that doesn't cover over the huge scale of charitable giving in the many, many tens of billions set against the government support in the hundreds of millions. Well, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, was asked an important question. Is this the beginning of deglobalization? In other words, do we all become separated more? Not just as individuals, but do nations become more separated? Is the EU in peril? Are our alliances in peril? He said this. People have tried to make a distinction between a global crisis and a crisis of globalization. It's undoubtedly a crisis of globalization, whether it's the beginning of the end of the global supply chains, the global flows of capital, the global communications, I doubt. But I think it's going to force us to rethink what we mean by the management of the global economy. It's going to force us to rethink what constitutes the right policies for a global society. And in his wrap-up conclusion, he says, the big issue we're left with is the unfairness of the distribution of resources in our society. That's those who suffer the most as a consequence, the poorest people in our societies, often coming from different ethnic communities, like an Asian community, people from poorer households struggling as a consequence of needing to continue to fight to work. Although in a rich society, people trying to balance their realities and balance their demands. And what we need in response is, as I said before, not a fearsome outcome and an isolationist outcome, more an embracing engagement and a more generous outcome. Let me give you one or two more facts. Well, this comes from a series of international assessments. And these are uncomfortable. Foreign investment is collapsing as investors dump emerging market stocks and bonds worth $83.3 billion in March alone, and they stampede to safer, richer world markets. In the first 90 days of 2020, the cumulative outflow of foreign funds was greater than the whole of 2008. That was the worst year on record, the beginning of the global financial crisis. In other words, money is leaving markets en masse, going back to investor holdings and individuals. The South African rand fell in value by 32% against the dollar in this period. The Mexican peso by 24%, the Brazilian real by 23%, the Indonesian rupee by 14%. And of the 189 member countries of the International Monetary Fund, 108 of those countries have now asked the fund for help. Commodities are in spiral downwards, whether it is oil or it's zinc, or whether it's flowers from Kenya and Ethiopia, or tin from Bolivia, or copper from Zambia. Nobody is paying market values. The poor get poorer. Well, how do we deal with poverty on the face of it when we need to have richness in the spirit of it? Let's look at our second film about the 10th apple.
Hey everyone, you're watching Wisdom Shots. Let me share with you a short story. A hunter once lost his way deep inside the jungle while chasing a deer. He used all his navigation skills, but neither did he find any way out of the jungle, nor could he find any food to eat for 3 days at a stretch. He lost all hope and he thought he will die out of hunger. And that's exactly when an apple tree caught his sight. He was so happy, he collected 10 to 20 apples to feed him for the rest of his search. As he ate the first apple, his joy knew no bounds. He just couldn't stop feeling grateful and blessed. But he thanked life, he thanked God. He was very happy. He could not believe his luck when he ate the first apple. But he was less grateful while having the second apple. And even lesser grateful when he had the fifth apple. Somehow, with each passing apple, the joy kept on reducing drastically. He just could not enjoy the 10th apple. He even started throwing apples which were not tasting good and even started complaining. He had already taken for granted the gift of having found an apple tree in the middle of a forest after 3 long days of wandering with hunger. In economics, this is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. It's actually the law of diminishing gratitude. In simple words, taking things for granted. Or let's just call it as the 10th apple effect. The 10th apple represents our lack of appreciation for gifts of life. The hunter represents all of us, and the apple represents the gifts that life gave us. The 10th apple is as sweet as the first apple. If the 10th apple fails to give you as much pleasure as the first one, there's nothing wrong with the apple, but with the person enjoying the fruit. Yeah. The reason I shared this story is because we were having the 10th apple effect in our world for some time. Abundance of everything. And then we started complaining. We complained about people, job, government, traffic, food, weather, everything. But during this lockdown, I'm sure that most of you started appreciating a lot of things in life. Things which we took for granted. Even small things like, it's so nice to talk to a human being. And I'm so glad that, we got vegetables to cook today. Or thank God I'm healthy and safe. Things like that. We never, had this kind of thoughts 2 months back. The present situation is shaking us and showing us that we are dependent on something bigger than what we think. And we have to be grateful for all the blessings. Now we started appreciating the luxury we lived in. The abundance of food, products, freedom, health, good old days. And now we are realizing that we were taking all these things for granted. So right now, all of us have 2 choices: be grateful or be stressful. And it's a choice. I want to share with you an incident on this regard. I don't know whether it's a true incident or fiction. I got it as a forward, but a really powerful one. So a 73-year-old man in Italy, he got better in the hospital. He was told to pay for the ventilator for 1 day, and the old man started crying. So the doctor advised him not to cry over the bill and we'll manage and things like that. But what the old man said made all the doctors cry. And Grandpa said, I'm not crying because of the money I have to pay. I can pay all the money. I'm crying because I've been breathing God's air for 73 years and I never paid for it. Now it takes 5,000 euros to use a ventilator in a hospital for 1 day. Do you know how much I owe God? I didn't thank God for that before. Grandpa's words are worth our reflection. When we breathe the air freely without pain, no one takes the air seriously, right? Only when we enter the hospital, we realize that even breathing oxygen with a ventilator costs money. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Gratitude is a strong, powerful, empowering emotion. Sometimes we have to bring more awareness and be more grateful for the gifts in life. Gratitude supports our immune system. It makes us strong. But on the other hand, stress makes you weak. One thing I've experienced in my life is whenever you are grateful, if you're grateful, you can't be fearful, right? Both doesn't go together. So be aware of your state of mind and start counting your blessings. Thank you is the best prayer you can chant all day long. The law of the universe is when you are grateful for things you have in life, you will have more things to be grateful for. I repeat, when you are grateful for things you have in life, you will have more things to be grateful for. So never let the 10th apple effect make you take the gifts in life for granted. Never let your gratitude for life fade away. Thank you so much for watching. Stay happy, stay healthy.
Well, I hope you found that as overwhelming as I did when I first saw it. If we're grateful for more things in life, we'll have more things to be grateful for. And the whole story of the 10th apple effect is probably all of our story. How much we relish of that freedom, but also of our largesse. If we think about any of this in January or February, and here we are just 7 weeks on, we're kind of consumed by it. And many of us thinking, well, what will we be when we come out of this? Not just what will we be physically, what will we be in health? How will we have a job? Will we have economy and money? But what kind of people will we be? We've seen exponential beauty. An old man at 100 walks 1.6 miles. 35 million pounds is given. Phenomenal. Shows that age is not a barrier to being able to do remarkable and compelling things. Then he becomes #1 in the music charts, and the whole world celebrates. I have people from every corner of the world telling me about Captain Tom, now Colonel Tom. Isn't that remarkable? His generosity of time and energy that meant that actually all of us got to see how you can make a big difference from a simple step. And we've seen the appreciation of those we would have called the basic workers. Well, they're vital workers. The everyday folk, not the celebrities, not the influencers, not the fancy folk, but the everyday folk. We're learning a different perspective. Some of the political thinkers say it's going to lead us to being grimmer, meaner, tighter, because money will get tighter. My passion every time money has got tighter is to find ways to give more away. And if we have a rule that says in life, when stuff is tough for us, well, it's bound to be tougher for someone else. So this is the chance I have to engage in that genuine generosity. But that only comes when the kind of inner drivers of my being are all about creating a better, stronger, healthier community, a better society. And that only comes when I have the right mindset about my position as a citizen, my responsibility, but also that generosity of mine comes when I'm so grateful for what I think is my little, but is somebody else's enormous amount. I'm going to read you 2 more things, and then we can have some questions. Now, this is probably going to be a difficult read for some of you, because I can imagine, being most of you of a younger generation, you may or may not think about Margaret Thatcher very well. Well, I worked with her for 5 years in 10 Downing Street, not as a conservative, but as an independent consultant. No, it's not on my bio, so Nicolette may well be surprised. But it was a joyful period of helping to make big change happen in our inner cities. It was the end of a period after the 1981 and 1985 urban riots, the stuff that everybody knows began in Brixton and spread upwards to Moss Side in Manchester and Handsworth in Birmingham and right across the UK. And I got picked out to make that difference. And I loved it. And I got to see the woman right at the side. How she thought, how she operated, what her instincts were. Then somebody sent me this article last week, written by a journalist called Peggy Noonan. She's well known in the US. She's a columnist on the Wall Street Journal, and she comments live on NBC and ABC on television on a daily basis. An article called The Iron Lady and the Coronavirus Age. Well, that captured my imagination. What could Margaret Thatcher have to bring for the coronavirus age. This is what Peggy Noonan says. What is essential now, she says, from our political class? I find inspiration, she says, in the monumental work written by the journalist Charles Moore, his 3-volume biography of Margaret Thatcher. It's a masterpiece of fairness and insight. It's also something new, a work of justice done to a great woman in modern politics. At its heart, he says, is not a story about political survival, but about seriousness, about the purpose of politics, which is to guide your nation, your people safely through the world, while creating the conditions and arrangements so that they can flourish. It's about winning the argument about how to achieve safety and flourishing. In his stirring epilogue, Charles Moore sums up Margaret Thatcher's career, legacy, and her essential nature. She cannot be understood, he writes, based on her public statements. She must be seen in the light of her character. Its contradictions, he says, were striking. She was high-minded and highly educated, yet she had a common touch. She was fierce, but always kind, courteous, never rude, calculating, yet principled, matter-of-fact, yet romantic, frank, yet secretive, astute, yet innocent, rational, yet capricious, puritanical, yet flirtatious. She combined an immense assurance about following her own way with a permanent uneasiness in life. She once commented, interestingly, on the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, many of you will know that story. It's in the Gospels. Jesus tells the story about a man who is going along a roadway and he gets attacked, a Jewish man, and he's left to lie dead on the side of the road. And along comes a Samaritan, half Arab, half Jew. Now, a Samaritan is a kind of unacceptable person at the time. They were to keep away. But he's the only one who can help. And the Samaritan helps the Jewish man who's broken down on the side of the road, picks him up, puts him on his own donkey, takes him, says, to a place where he can receive help and pays for him to stay there. Margaret Thatcher's point was this. The generosity of the Samaritan came from his wealth. He gave what he had to empower and enable the Jewish man to be safe. He put him up, he bought him food, he looked after him. He engaged with the reality of his needs. That is the sterling character that we need. Not to think that generosity is to throw a few coins to an appeal, but to engage in the changing realities of our society, to have a sharp mind dedicated to societal transformation, to work hard on solutions, and to take the long arc of decades to achieve them. So now I'm going to finish. And a poem is going to appear on your screen. It's a poem I want you all to be able to have. Well, it was written way back in 1869, and it was reprinted in 1919 for the Spanish pandemic flu. Remember I told you at the beginning, 50 million people died from the 1919 pandemic. Well, this poem was written in 1869, repeated in 1919. Look at the image, listen to the words. This is timeless. And people stayed at home, and they read books, and listened, and they rested, and did exercise, and they made art and played, and they learned new ways of being. They stopped and listened more deeply. Someone meditated, someone prayed, someone met their shadow, and people began to think differently, and people healed. And in the absence of people who lived in ignorant ways, dangerous, meaningless, and heartless, the earth also began to heal. And when the danger ended, people found themselves, they grieved for the dead, made new clothes, and dreamed of new visions, and created new ways of living, and completely healed the earth, just as they were healed. My hope is that my healing and your healing will be a more generous life. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much. There's so much wisdom there, and I just want to listen to that again and just soak in it. There's so much richness, so thank you so much. We do have some questions, and so I'm just going to read the first. Aaron, thank you for yours. Lord Hastings, what inspired you to get into teaching, and how did that experience act as a stepping stone to the ventures you embarked on and the lifestyle you chose to adopt, in particular, philanthropy and mentorship?
Well, what inspired me to get into teaching, this is an old saying, a very old one. It said, if you're not very good at anything, you teach. And if you can't teach, you teach religious studies. And that's what I taught. Well, I kind of felt that what inspired me to get into teaching was the opportunity to affect the thinking of children's minds, to be able to shift maybe a generation's perspective. And one of the interesting things I found was that in the very, put it this way, kind of second-rate school I ended up being a teacher in for a very good 5 years, that I changed more of the culture in the school by the things I was seen to do other than the words I taught. For example, I observed how much litter, mess, clutter there was around the school. I talked to the head about, surely this is a matter for the caretakers. He said the caretakers can't be bothered. They've given up on the cans, the bottles, the crisp packets. I thought, I'm going to go and do it myself. So I started in my second term, going in at 7 in the morning, cleaning up this school site. Kids would notice me, laugh at me initially. Why was I doing it? I did it every single day, 5 days a week. Then other kids wanted to come and join and thought it was fun. And then I had a little army of about 20 kids doing it with me. And 2 years on, we won the London Authority Award for the cleanest school site in London. It changed the entire culture of the school. The graffiti went from the books, the damage to the windows went, the children were more polite to each other. I just learned that simple little things can change about a culture, can change how people think. So how did that connect to the next stages of my life? Well, the answer is it didn't. Well, maybe it did. Because the story of all of my jobs, roles, functions is, and I'll be honest with you, I've never applied for them. I haven't sought them or any of the honors. They've all come along. And all the shifts I made after teaching all happened because somebody remembered me somewhere and rang up. And that's absolutely true. I just waited for the next phone call to come, and it keeps on coming. So, I believe that we create impressions and we leave impressions. And if our reputation becomes such that people see us as engaged, generous, involved, committed, serious, that Thatcher quality, having a long vision, there we are.
Brilliant. Thank you. And now another actually from Samson. Before you were able to be financially charitable, what were the other ways that you were able to be generous? You may have answered that a bit through cleaning up the school playground.
Well, I would say, and I hope this isn't too tight a challenge, I've always wanted to be and have been financially charitable. It doesn't matter how little you think you have something. I spoke in a debate in the House of Lords last week about income sustainability. And what everyone was kind of pushing for was, should we have a national income provided by government for all? as a protection against difficult times. And I wouldn't argue necessarily against that, although I think there's a big incentive to need to work. But I brought up the point that on a visit to Ethiopia just a year and a half ago, a group of us who went from Tier Fund, we met with about 200 women out of a network of 400,000 women, all of whom have been taught to save their 2 pennies. Now, their 2 pennies is the smallest coins you can have of almost no economic value. But if you save the 2 pennies by the 2 pennies by the 2 pennies by the 2, and they would save them in cluster groups of 25. These are the facts. 400,000 women saving 2 pence each every day over every week, had raised $26 million. And they started investing in businesses. And they created new wealth. And one of the wonderful women we met, who was selling spices in the market, she said she started off with a tiny little spice pot, just selling some basic things on the edge of the market. Now she has this big display of spices and 2 other businesses, including, she says, employing her useless husband. And we were very impressed. She said she made him into a taxi driver and turned it into a successful business when he was just a bit of a slob at home. And she sent her 2 children to private school and on to university, a woman who started counting pennies. So I've always had the view that even if I only have £10 left in my account, I can give £1 away. And we have to learn at the youngest age to start with perpetual generosity. And then it becomes a habit. And then you don't think you need that 100% because you don't.
Brilliant. Des, thank you for your question. Who's been your biggest inspiration when it comes to being generous? And what was it that stood out and challenged you?
Well, my biggest inspiration, and I say this genuinely, in being generous, 2 people, I'm going to say 1 man, 1 woman. My biggest inspiration, of course, would be the life of Jesus and his perpetual passion to give of everything that God had made him as creator and Lord, to give that with great ease to those he came across. I love the fact that when they said, where are you going to find Jesus? Where can we find him? And they said, you'll find him with the drunks and the prostitutes and the homeless. That's where you'll find him. He liked to be amongst people in need so that he could be an answer as compared to just a challenger. And I think we need to learn that generosity of spirit, that willingness to wash someone else's feet, as he said, this is the example I leave you, that then sets people on the how do I be like you question. So definitely Jesus an inspiration and continues to be. And the second one was one of the shortest women the world has ever known. The Queen's pretty short, but Mother Teresa was even shorter than the Queen. And Mother Teresa died in the same month as Diana, Princess of Wales. That was 1997. Diana died at the beginning of the month. Mother Teresa died at the end of the month. And she had lived a life of just perpetual engagement with the world's most poor. But the big thing about Mother Teresa was that she would take the advocacy of their needs to the highest places in the world. I never forget when she came to London, met Margaret Thatcher, and Margaret Thatcher bowed to Mother Teresa. When she met the Clintons in Washington, and the Clintons got on their knees to Mother Teresa, because this woman embodied utter grace and continuous love, had very little, but gave everything.
Brilliant. And another question from Nathan. Thinking about the new world we will enter after this virus, one of the main characteristics will be that of distrust, of governments, of travel, of people themselves. How do you feel the charitable sector might need to approach giving in the world that will be somewhat governed by the importance of social distancing and caution?
Well, I tread on delicate territory here by suggesting that while we need to be alert and safe, we don't need to be daft. and distant. One of the prisons that I have a joy of visiting, and a group of prisoners that will become very special friends. The prison officer told me just recently that he had to knock on a man's door. These men are locked down 23 hours and 45 minutes to tell this prisoner who's serving a life sentence that his brother had been knifed, murdered the night before in South London. This is just 3 weeks ago. And he said that when he knocked on the man's door and the man opened the door, well, the prison officer opens the door, really, because they have the keys, opened the door. The prison officer said, I want to come in and I'm going to hug you because I need to tell you bad news. And the prisoner said, but if you come near me, you might get the virus. And the officer said, but I can't tell you what I need to tell you if I don't hold you. Now, I know that prison officer and I know the person he was talking about. And we're all going to have to make big choices about how much we are fighting for ourselves and how much we care about giving ourselves away. Now, if we look at the reality of the facts of infections and then the consequent numbers of those who got the virus and then those who die from it, and we actually look at the hard facts, I'll just give you them quickly. This is as of today. Just short of 2 million, 1.98 million have been tested in the UK. Just over 200,000 have been proved to have the virus. And today, just today, 208 died. And so far, there have been 32,000 deaths, 35,000 deaths. Putting it in perspective means that you don't have to fear everybody, and you shouldn't fear everybody. And it does mean that we have to make personally strong decisions about the fact that we're not going to drive a culture of fear and disconnection, but a culture of generosity and engagement, while being responsible, being healthy, and staying safe. I just quote the words of Jesus again. He said, if you want to protect your life, you have to give it away. And if you want to lose your life, you'll fight to keep it. And we need to give it away.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, I know many of us will still feel a bit of fear underneath, and what your talk taught us was that there is a choice, and there is a sense that we do need to choose to step out, to see the need, see that charities need us, see that the poor need us at this time, and recognise that actually through being thankful and grateful for what we've got, it almost creates a well inside us where we can feel some freedom in order to give. And BeMORE is all about encouraging ourselves to be generous so that there is this cycle, this intoxicating cycle where we just can't help it because it's so rewarding and joyful, and it brings freedom. And I love the fact that you say, hold on to the facts. And I really love the fact that you're encouraging us to embrace being engaged in this moment, seeking good wisdom. One final question from me, Michael, is if there was one tip you could say to our BeMORE community that just encompasses everything that you've taught us tonight, what would it be?
Well, first of all, to say thank you to you, Nicolette, and thank you to Nisha, who's done the technology, and thank you to all of you who've taken your time to be with me this evening. My joy to be with you, but thank you for taking your time, and thank you for BeMORE. So one thing I would attempt to say is strong-minded people, and we're going to need strong-minded people, build great, mature, generous alliances. We need a connected world The best of what can be garnered from one corner can be shared with another. One of my big passions is the destitution, the everyday destitution that still, as I say, just short of 900 million people live in sub-Saharan Africa in extreme poverty and hunger, where on average every day 23 to 25,000 children under 6 die of diarrhea-related diseases. That's every day, not every week, not over 7 weeks, every day. So we need a generous, engaged, open-handed, open-hearted world. We're fretting about ourselves a lot right now. And there's people who have just drifted on a boat across the Mediterranean in the last 24 hours, don't even know whether they can survive in this panicked Europe that they think they've come to. And why have they come our way? Because life doesn't work for them down there. But we need an intelligent, open, fact-based, thoughtful, engaged, mature, knowledgeable, positive, generous mindset. That's one thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much again, Michael, for joining us. And thank you for all of you who are listening tonight. You can watch and listen again. The webinar will be up on YouTube. You can access it as well, probably in a day at BeMORE.co.uk. And you can find out how you can stay engaged and, in fact, maybe deepen or start your generous journey through BeMORE. You can find out how you can join our BeMORE online experiences on the website BeMORE.co.uk. I'm now going to finish with a quote. Now, this is from C.S. Lewis. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the end. So I encourage you to start. Start now, start where you are, and change the end. Thank you, all of you. Join us again, and thank you so much, Michael, once again. All the best, and good night.